What's something you can admit about a company you no longer work for? Story 1. I used to work in the marketing team for a large recruitment company. About 99% of the jobs posted on their websites. The company owned about 35 web domains and shared on other websites are fake. The marketing and SEO department was tasked in creating super optimized job listings that outperformed real job listings. To apply to these job listings, you would have to register an account. This would inflate our candidate database, and we would have loads of CVs. The sales team would then take this information and contact companies to get them to pay to put their open vacancies on our websites because we had one of the largest candidate databases. I remember getting so annoyed by this practice, I started reporting these vacancies as fake, even on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn rejected my report saying it was legitimate. It wasn't, and I know this because I created that fake vacancy. What makes this even more alarming is that so many recruitment companies do this. If you want to apply for a job, you're better off going to that company's website instead and not using a third party. I left that place and swore I would never work in recruitment again. Story 2. Nursing homes are always understaffed and overworked. The worst one I ever saw was 3 caregivers to 72 residents. That's 3 people who are responsible for feeding, toileting, and showering 72 people every day. Mistakes and abuse are incredibly common due to the sheer burnout that is rampant. Imagine being told after a 16-hour shift that you aren't allowed to leave because of abandonment laws for another 16 hours because someone didn't show up for their shift and doing so while making barely above minimum wage. Ida. Because this blew up and I assumed it would get buried, I live in WA state. There are some exceptions, but here's some info on the abandonment laws nursing homes threaten workers with. They count on workers to not know all the loopholes and exceptions. Story 3. My family owned veterinary hospitals. Now I know the price has gotten nuts, but that is not what this post is about. Most vets truly care, and I have seen some do anything, literally anything, to help your animal. I remember wanting to leave after closing, so tired, and my dad, the vet, telling me he wasn't leaving yet. He wanted to sit with this one dog all night. Story 4, long past NDA. I used to support restaurant POS systems. Every system managed and supported by us had the same admin username and password for the computers, the admin software, back of house, and the credit card processing software. Also, their employee database file on the terminals was an Excel spreadsheet. It had their names, login hash ES, addresses, date of birth, phone numbers, social security numbers, etc. And you could mention aforementioned admin username, password to access them. They also outsourced support to a country that hates the U.S. As I trained them, they reminded me, quite often, how they don't like the U.S. Story 5. As a former compliance director for telehealth mental health agencies, I would urge people to run from agencies like BetterHelp, Talkspace, Charlie Health, Guideline Healthcare, Ellie Health, etc. These are started by TechCore and other dollar-driven corporations and have little interest in protecting you, whether it's your mental health, confidentiality, or ethically driven care. These places are unacceptable and have low-quality treatment providers. You are best to find a local MH agency or individuals on Psychology Today. Story 6. Dozens of things are stolen from every single Walmart every single day, and the fucks given by management about it are very few and far between. Edit. They like to pretend otherwise, but in reality, management actively joke about how much shit was stolen day to day. What they say to everyone else and what they say behind the scenes doesn't remotely match up. Story 7. It is very difficult for IHG to remove hotels from the portfolio if they are paying their dues and are mid-life cycle. They can be a very bad hotels, and there is nothing that can be done except for some rare life-threatening situations. Some hotels have consistently failed every quality evaluation for years, but will remain in the system because at the end of the day, they make money for the company, no matter how hard they harm the brand name. Marriott can do it a bit more easily for non-compliant hotels due to the structure of the quality department being through a third party. Story 8. At the company I worked for, everyone was assigned a Microsoft account. This was used for Outlook emailing and Teams for instant messaging and video calls. Naturally, plenty of privileged and sensitive information was exchanged in these ways. Everyone had the same password. It was first name, last name. Every employee and manager. I didn't have the guts to test the theory on an executive's account. And this was a company that, among other droll and boring trainings, made sure we had our requisite cybersecurity/anti-phishing training. There was lots more silliness at that company, but that right there tells you all you need to know. Story 9. I worked for a candy company that makes chocolate-coated pretzels and turtles for over 5 years. By the time I left, I wouldn't eat the candy even when they were giving it away. I saw them let tainted product leave the factory and covering it up because reworking it would be too expensive to faking food safety compliance and safety checks. Years after I left, the entire team running operations got replaced at once. So maybe it's better now, but holy shit, it made me paranoid about packaged food in general and a little horrified at how much blind faith we put in the people that make our food. Edit. Don't want them to sue me, so I won't say the name, but it's basically the top result when you Google chocolate turtles. Story 10. Your child's daycare worker is extremely overworked and underpaid. Parents would complain all the time about how much daycare cost, but it's less expensive than a babysitter. I always wanted to ask the complaining parent how much they would charge to watch 13 children they were not related to. I worked in the U.S. We literally had to have a plan on what we would do if an armed gunman broke in. Story 11. I've worked for Bank of America and Wells Fargo, and both banks screw over customers constantly. But there is a difference in how and why they do it. Bank of America will screw you over because they are huge and disorganized, and no one has a clue what's going on. So customers get screwed over when people don't know how to do their job, and no one knows how to fix it when things go wrong. Wells Fargo will screw you over, and they know exactly what they are doing and how they are going to do it. They will intentionally design a process to take too long, forcing the customer to pay additional fees. Story 12. Back about 30 years ago, I worked in the IT department for a famous brand name aerospace firm, name withheld to protect the innocent engineers, specializing in the construction and testing of satellites. My main responsibilities were maintaining some very old computer systems, a lot of stories about that, and some ground equipment, but sometime I would have to put on a bunny suit and fix something at engineering workstations in the high bays. One day, a strange wooden box about size of a large shoebox was shipped to my desk by the internal mail people. I sometime got shipments of things like memory modules or hard disks, but this box has paper stickers on it clearly labeled flight hardware, something that should never have been shipped to me. Out of curiosity, I opened it and found in the box a device called a flight sequencer, basically one of the key devices that controls a spacecraft in flight. What was stranger, the spacecraft that this sequencer belonged to was a high-profile deep space probe for a Mars mission, one of the first missions to Mars in a long time. More confusing was that Mars craft has been launched about 3 months earlier. So I found myself holding the flight hardware sequencer for a space probe that was already several million miles away, and there would be no chance to install it now. Of course, there is a nearly 100% chance a spare had been used for the launch, but there was a certain **T moment when I realized what it was. Of course, a few months later, that space probe was lost when it tried to enter Mars orbit. I'm sure that is completely unrelated chance, right? Story 13. I worked in human services, DDDHHS adult mostly. The amount of money that companies receive for group homes is nuts. Almost none of it gets spent on the individuals or training staff paying them. A lot of stuff gets swept under the rug. The place I worked for would give you, I kid you not, a 25-cent raise and would freak out when I mentioned, I was a manager at the time, of doing $100 gift cards for Employee of the Month. They thought that was outrageous. TLDR, hundreds of millions of tax dollars are wasted by companies that commit a litany of white-collar crimes. I live in Nebraska. Our DHHS department is really corrupt too. Story 14. I don't know the specifics, the laws and such, but the manager of the Amazon warehouse I was at wasn't allowed to tell workers they couldn't use the fans or AC in these 100-degree-plus environments, but somehow he was allowed to shut off the fans and AC whenever he wanted. So this guy would spend the entire day, most days, following around anyone who would turn them on and personally turn them back off immediately. He was later fired on paper for telling people they couldn't use the fans and AC, but really, it was because the new district head just didn't like him. Amazon had absolutely no problems with the guy shutting fans off. People had been sending in complaints about it for years but never had a word back about it. Story 15. Stanford University has a database full of everyone that's ever attended the school or ever been treated at their hospitals. With the right access, you can look up anyone in their system and see their employment history, every place they've lived since graduating, and their connections within the larger Stanford community. The best part, there's a section that gives all the tax income information, with an estimate based on equations that say how much the person could realistically donate to the school without negative effect. That way, when they call to fundraise, they know exactly how much to ask for. Story 16. A lot of the stuff you donate to Goodwill goes straight into the garbage. No, the clothes aren't washed before going to the sales floor, and most of the items are not cleaned. Please be careful and disinfect if you decide to purchase it. Yes, they are raising prices to give more to the higher-ups while not giving anything to the people actually doing all of the work. Goodwill pays disabled employees significantly less than minimum wage. Most of the nice stuff that you donate is going to e-commerce to be sold at an inflated auction price and not to a local person who might want it. No, the sales donation associate can't give you a receipt with a cash value for all of the junk that you just threw in the bin. Stop asking. The receipt just shows a rough estimate of what you donated. It's up to you to determine the value of your donation if you're that much of a tax rat. No, you can't sell anything to Goodwill. That's not what the word donation means. Yes, this is all somehow legal. Story 17. Positive 1. It's a pretty small place, but Seattle Sutton's Healthy Eating actually was super serious about food safety and cleanliness and never refroze product. Ingredients arrived refrigerated, and surplus would be frozen until the next meal it was needed for. If it got thawed out and still not used for the next cycle, it was thrown away/donated to local farmers. They had zero issue with pulling food off the line and even trashing entire batches if something was off. She tried franchising once, and none of the new locations could maintain her personal quality and safety standard, so she shut it down after about 18 months, even though she was making good money off it. Seattle herself was also super nice, and all her grandkids worked summers there through high school and college and came in and worked their asses off instead of being the arrogant asshats so many Nepo hires are. Story 18. One of the coffee shops I used to work in absolutely had mob connections. We were never allowed to take bills larger than $50 unless they were a friend of Angelo's. Then we were supposed to let them pay for their $3 coffee with a $100 bill and just give them the change. There was no ink marker either to test the bills, and my coworker who asked about ordering one got fired, so we all just didn't bring it up again, LOL. Story 19. Tech companies are laying people off in the masses, yet those same companies are still spending like crazy on their offsites or partnership for lunch and learns and account mapping exercises. I understand the dollars come from separate budgets, but someone was let go or not given a raise so you could treat 20 people to dinner and drinks. Story 20. You'll get fired. They called it discontinuing my employment if you get hurt in the job. I was out on workers' comp, and they put me down as family medical leave. When I couldn't return to work within the 16 weeks of family leave, they fired me, but told me I could reapply for my job I was doing while on light duty. When I reapplied, I was told that I didn't qualify for the job I was applying for. All this after working there for 5 years. Story 21. Life insurance companies have an entire floor of 100 attorneys. Their entire job is to create marketing material and boilerplate content that has so many loopholes that no one gets paid out what is promised. Life insurance is all smoke and mirrors. It's a grift. Also, temp agencies hire almost exclusively women. It is the modern way of exploiting women and paying them less than minimum wage when adjusted for. No sick days, no holidays, no vacation days, no health care. 25-hour turns out to be 14-hour on this pay scale. It saves the company money, but it harms all women. Also, the largest corporation in the United States is a temp agency. They often promise the woman this is a temp to hire contract, but the employer never hires them. They also rarely ask on behalf of the employee because they would lose their revenue stream if they did. So this grift is by design. Story 22. Many of the 2-3-year-old lease cars that look like they're in pristine condition really aren't. They get sent to major auctions that recondition them to make them look as new as possible in the quickest, cheapest way possible. Dings and chips get fixed, but not in a proper way. Prep is done hastily. Paint may flake off in 1-2 years. Parts like trim and handles are masked off instead of removed, much like a Mako job, etc. It just has to look pristine rolling across the auction block and sitting on the used dealer's lot. After that, it's the buyer's problem. It's also while some frequently blame manufacturers for absolute shit finishes on slightly used cars, there's many on the road that it's caused by an auction's refinishing process. Story 23. Starbucks is charging you an absurd amount of money for convenience and sugar. Absurd. I know it's not exactly a secret, but I don't think people really understand how much of that drink is just milk. It's just milk. Put double the amount of flavored creamer you normally would in some cold brew you buy from the grocery store, and you'll still save a boatload of money. Story 24. Used to work for a market research company. If you're old like me, you probably remember walking through a mall and someone with a clipboard approaching to ask if you'd be interested in offering your opinion on a new product. Those guys. They're still around but have adopted their business model since malls are pretty much ghost towns these days. They used to have food studies for big names like Kraft, Nabisco, Conagra, etc. They would bid projects based on the hash of respondents a company wanted. Basically, sample size. So if they sold a survey for 5K respondents, they might split that up as 100 people across 50 different malls, and they'd have a week to collect the responses. Inevitably, sometimes they wouldn't be able to get the hash of people needed, and rather than admit this and prorate the cost accordingly, the company would just fabricate results out of thin air. They even built quite a complex system with the sole purpose of being able to quickly and easily create fictional response data that looked real enough. So a company might pay $45K for those 5K responses, and 60% of the data they received could be entirely fake. This company also did focus groups where a bunch of people would come in and they'd demo a product. It could be anything from a fragrance to a food to a laundry detergent. Sometimes they'd have trouble getting people, so half the people in the room would be employees, friends of employees, or employee family members. They were instructed to act like they didn't know each other to deceive the client. It was overall a crazy, toxic work environment. My first job out of college, and I'm glad I ended up getting fired for refusing to do some of the sketchy stuff they asked of us. Story 25. I worked at Wells Fargo during the fake account stuff. I was 23 trying to conduct professional meetings with VPs whose careers tripled my age, trying to tell them what was going on so they can address it. This was several years before shit hit the fan in public. Luckily, it took me just 2 meetings to understand that literally even the CEO was in on it, El Mao. Couple months later, I get written up for insubordination because I refused to open a fake account for an elderly couple who obviously didn't know about it. As soon as they left, my manager asked me to forge their signature and transfer their own money into it. I had my securities license, Series 7 and 66, and they still asked me to do it, meaning I could have sued them for enough to retire several times over with the full backing of the SEC, more like some arbitrator named Dan or something, where I probably never would have had to step into a courtroom. I left and moved on. A lot of banks still operate this way due to an overabundance of mitigated mental composure, failing to realize a better revenue structure than the bottom feeder fee income. Fully grown adults operating at the executive level, leeching off $10.30 monthly bullshit fees from bullshit accounts, where bullshit stacked on top of bullshit sadly affords several-figure compensation on a recurring basis. It's still going on where these various regional banks need to be taken outside and fucked in the street. Bunch of hoe bags. Story 26. Goodwill is a company masquerading as a charity. They focus on hiring people that otherwise would find it hard to get a job, which is good. But they manipulate that and mistreat employees, pay lower wages, etc., because they know they're desperate to keep the job. Goodwill, at least the area stores where I worked, wouldn't give homeless people anything for free. They were supposed to fill out paperwork, and it took weeks to get approved. I'd have people coming in during freezing weather, begging for gloves, and was supposed to have them fill out paperwork? Fuck that. I'd give them whatever they needed. It was free for them. And if the people donated knew that a greedy corporation was denying people in need, they'd probably be upset. Goodwill owed me months of back pay because the store manager abandoned everyone, and I took over the store for several months and kept getting told that I'd get retroactive payments. Then one day I come into work and 2 police officers were there to walk me out. Never told me anything other than my employment was no longer needed and I was trespassed from the store.